Well, good afternoon. Hope you're having a great day. It is Wednesday here, and you know what Wednesday means, right? It is time to talk the Kings. I'm Kevin John, filling in for the incomparable Lena Washington today. She's out doing bigger and better things.
Yeah, she is.
Right?
Oh, boy.
And I'm joined by producer Sean Cunningham here. Sean, how you doing today?
Good, man. How's it going?
You know, I'm just hanging, trying to do my best Lena Washington impersonation.
You're holding it down. We can get through this.
That's right. All I can do is holding it down. And the
Make
Kings,
her proud.
Right? I'll make Lena proud and my mom proud. Those are the two people that matter. And hopefully the Kings are making us proud. They have 8 games left remaining on the season. A lot of questions surrounding them. Still not mathematically eliminated from the playoffs yet.
They're done. They're done.
Thank you, Sean. Sean just wrapped up the math equation there. They're done.
No, I'm not good at math, but I know what reality is, and we can look at that and go, that's a hell of a mountain to climb. And when you look at just everything that would have to go right, it would be improbable. So the better chance for them is just to win as many games as possible. You don't have a first-round pick. Finish the season off with a high note. They've already exceeded, I think, you and I. Kevin didn't get here till like mid-season, so we didn't get a chance to talk to you about what your predictions were for this team. But he is a Sacramento Stockton kid, so your Stockton Kings in the playoffs for the first time. But we didn't have this conversation. I don't know what you had hoped for the Kings for this season. Mine was like 24, 25 wins. What was yours?
To be honest with you, going off the last few seasons that the Kings had did and how unfortunate their finishes have been.
Right.
I was thinking of them of being possibly a 30-win team going into this year, which is still pretty high hopes, But that's what I was looking at. And once they started getting underway, as you know, I said the Kings could have an opportunity to be a 7th seed in the Western Conference playoffs once we were around December, January, when I was here. And
once the ball got rolling and they were just trickling off wins and exceeding people's expectations, because 30 wins, that's in no means a playoff team. However, like you said, once they started getting the mountain going, getting that ball rolling, wow, things looked like, wow, this team might be kind of special and being within the conversation. We were hoping that conversation might go on a couple more weeks, but it's still, like you said, for the optimists out there, not mathematically eliminated. So I guess technically there's still some hope. Except for Sean.
Sean says it's done. Sean says it's a wrap. Well, on that same note, Sean, one of the questions that I had coming up and we were planning on using today if this was live was, would the Kings be able to finish above 500 this year? Given the remaining of their schedule, the last 8 games, the chance or the probability that they can finish the season above 500, which hasn't been done since the 05-06 season, which was the last time they made the playoffs. So I guess I'll ask you, do you feel in the last 8 games that they have remaining, it is a possibility for them to finish?
I mean, sure. They've been the one thing I've said is all along, they've shown since December, really, once we kind of got 30 games in and understanding what this team was about, they've shown that that's exactly what they are, a 500 basketball team. Coincidentally, they're 37-37 now. So to your point, 8 games remaining. Can they still be that? Can they be a 500 team? I think yes, they can. And I think, look, more to the point, whether they are or they're not, they're only going to be a game or 2 removed from 500. So to me, that's a win anyway. When you're at 37 wins, 40 is unheard of compared to what we were thinking. 30 wins for yourself, 24 for mine. So if you can get 40 wins, I think that's the goal. If you can get over 40 wins, that's the goal. Again, you're not playing for a first-round pick. So all of this is for the development, and this puts that expectation for next year, which will be that this team should be a playoff team next year. Not could they be, but should they be, and they should be next year.
Absolutely, I agree. So it kind of sounds like the consensus is whether or not they finish at 500 or not, they've already exceeded our expectations for them this year.
No doubt.
Especially with this core group of guys. Well, let's talk a little bit about.
If anybody tells you right now that there may have been somebody who said, they can make the playoffs. That's fine. But if anybody said that they were going to be a 40-win playoff or 40-win team, there's no way they were picking 40 wins. They thought maybe that the West would shift and maybe they'd finish 35, 36, which would have been a tall task anyway. But no, the playoffs are. I mean, look at the differential between 8 and 5 right now. It's like a half game. I mean, that's insane. And to think that Oklahoma City right now is sitting in the 8th and final playoff spot.
And they were like at, 4th or 5th just 2 weeks ago or a week ago or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it happens.
The Clippers are moving on up there.
And that's what happened to the Kings. You get in that gauntlet stretch where right around the All-Star break, you went at Denver, hit the break, go Golden State, and just that whole week games that led up to that Clipper game. You lost every game. Now, granted, you had the ball in your hands with a chance to win every one of those games, but they didn't, and that's what really took them out of the game.
Exactly, and that's actually one of the other things that I wanted to talk about, which is what you just touched on right here, is did Julia just walk in front?
That's all right.
Well, you know, it's always good when you get a Julian cameo.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's not like we're filming anything right now. So anyway, you know, touching on what you just said since the All-Star break, that was another kind of one of the questions that I had is, you know, what went wrong? We were just talking about the optimism with December, January, when I said, oh, they could be a 7th seed. We saw how well they were gelling with one another. We just saw, you know, Bagley exceeding expectations, De'Aaron Fox, Buddy Hield is shooting his lights out. You know, there was all these things that were going right for them. And then after the All-Star break, they went, what, 7 of 10? I mean, they've been below 500.
Right.
So that last stretch there, what has been the, you know, what would you say has been the issue? Is it not closing? Obviously, there's been a lot of close games that have been decided by less than 4 points, you know. So what do you attribute that?
Well, I think first and foremost, look, the Kings, their worst games of the season, their worst stretch of the season where they were losing games, they had the stretch of December when it went from the last 2.5 weeks of that month, and then you see right around the All-Star break. The thing that both of those stretches have in common was Marvin Bagley's injury. Marvin Bagley did not play in those games. He had a knee injury. The first one was a bone bruise. The other one ended up being like a contusion. Like it was just a, you know, it was tough. So I mean, the same knee. It was the same knee that took them out of it. And yeah, you go to rely on him so much. He's a guy that has, you know, is a go-to post player. He can rebound the ball, give you all those second chance opportunities. That in itself is, in my opinion, because they relied on Bagley so much. And going back to the draft, that whole Luka or Bagley conversation that we were all having for a better part of the offseason, they showed why why they went with Bagley, because of the fact they had utmost confidence in De'Aaron Fox. They looked at Luka Doncic as a point guard, and Marvin Bagley was a guy that addressed a need because, again, once they traded DeMarcus Cousins, they never found that guy who was a double-double type scorer and rebounder and give you all those big opportunities. Now, the NBA is kind of moving away from that, but look at how much they relied on a guy like Marvin Bagley, who's now taken his game and stretched it to the perimeter. Not, as he'll tell you, he's always had that in him. But yeah, he's becoming a perimeter threat. He gives them second chance opportunities, a double-double guy. And coincidentally, to answer the question, he was hurt during those stretches. And I think that ultimately is what took them out of it. Now, they also had a problem closing out games.
Absolutely.
And I also think De'Aaron Fox was a little bit to blame in that too, because just doing a show.
If only you guys can see what's going on in the newsroom behind us right
great.
Now.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's De'Aaron Fox, I think, needs to show the ability to be an aggressive scorer at all times, have that pedal to the metal, and not have to sometimes wait for his teammates to catch up with him. And I think as long as he can, that give and take of being that distributor and being that attacker, I think the more he attacks and is that player, the more success that they'll have.
More on De'Aaron Fox in a second, but you mentioned something interesting. You talked about Luka versus Marvin Bagley. You know, obviously, which selection they were going to go with. Obviously, last night, the Kings defeat the Mavericks. However, Luka has a pretty impressive game. He has a 7 triple-double on the year as a rookie, 7 triple-doubles. Going back, you know, you said earlier that's why they ended up going with Bagley, because obviously Luka was seen as a point guard they were trying to fill a need. Now that we're at, March 27th, this far into the season, do you still think Bagley above Luka is the better fit for the Kings?
For the Kings, I mean, I do if De'Aaron Fox is your point guard. So if you decide right now, here we are in, you know, end of March going into April, and if you're saying, you know what, maybe I'm not sold on De'Aaron Fox. First of all, you're probably on glue. I don't understand what's wrong with you. But look, both can be true. Both can be true. Marvin Bagley and Luka Doncic can both be stars in this league.
Absolutely. And they will be.
Right. And usually, you know, I think you see those people who say, well, you shouldn't draft on need. You should draft on best player available. That's true.
Just tell the Trailblazers that when they pick Sam Bowie over Jordan. But go ahead.
Right. But to that point, look at what happened in Dallas this year. The year before that, they took Dennis Smith Jr., a guy who was looked at as a combo scoring guard, not necessarily a point guard. But what happens when they brought Luka in? Where's Dennis Smith playing now? He's in New York. Right. Yeah. So it didn't go well. They all of a sudden had to, you know, pivot and change dramatically. So I think right now, look at it this way. Luka without a dominant big. So if you have Luka on this team and you've got Harry Giles and Willie Cauley-Stein, and those are your bigs. You know, that's what you're having.
Yeah, Cauley-Stein's a decent rebounder.
Well, he's also facing free agency, and he's also looking at being a restricted free agent, and he may not be here. I mean, you've drafted, you set yourself up in the draft to where you can say bye-bye to Willie Cauley-Stein if need be. It may or may not come to that. We'll see. The market will dictate what his value is. But now the flip side of that coin is Marvin Bagley and De'Aaron Fox with a guy like Buddy Hield who can stretch the floor. What do you like better?
About to say, you know, when you say De'Aaron and Marvin, these two young guns, I'm thinking Penny and Shaq around the Magic.
Right.
You know, two young guys that can really fly now.
Or more, I mean, look, could be a Dame Lillard and CJ McCollum.
Yeah.
I mean, what I think they would like to see is now granted, De'Aaron Fox doesn't shoot like this, but I think they're looking at it as we have Splash Brothers light. You know, we have at least one half of the Splash Brothers, and we've got a guy who pushes the pace more so than the fastest player in the NBA.
Yeah.
Right?
He's so quick.
Right. I mean, there's nobody, and he's a hell of a that defender. So, you know,
just don't tell that to D'Angelo Russell. I mean, I don't think he believes it.
Oh man, he's got some ownage on him right now. Right. That was impressive. But you know, I think look, the way they did their scouting and the way they project themselves is looking at it and say Marvin Bagley with De'Aaron Fox projects better for us, for the Kings, than Luka Doncic without a dominant big like Marvin Bagley. So if you put Luka Doncic here, the De'Aaron Fox era is likely over, and you're going in a different direction at that point. Or you look at trading De'Aaron Fox. Now remember, when Dallas made that trade to send Dennis Smith to New York, who was a part of that? Kristaps Porzingis. So maybe that was a trade that you can, but that guy's coming off an ACL. He's not playing this year.
Yeah.
So it's a gamble. But I think it was a safer pick. I think the Kings realized what they needed to have. And I think because they have so much faith in what De'Aaron Fox is and should be, that Marvin Bagley addressed such a need at that. And I think that's bearing fruit. I don't think anyone's looking at this going, you know, boy, that was a bad pick.
Exactly. It's not like the Kings pick Anthony Bennett or something over Luka.
Right.
So with that being said, obviously De'Aaron Fox's development and his improvement for the future is going to be critical to this basketball team as we look ahead to this future, since pretty much Sean has affirmed that they're not going to make the playoffs this year.
I mean, what do I know?
Yeah, you know a lot more than most.
What is it? It's a 0.01%. So you going to go bet on that?
I absolutely would not.
No.
Let's call our people in Vegas to see what the odds are.
So,
of that,
so
right?
just so you know, if the Clippers, which they did, the Clippers won last night, had the Kings lost to the Mavs, which they didn't, they swept the Mavs. So they're even going back to that, you know, that conversation. Luka didn't beat the Kings at all this year. Now he's on a terrible team, so I'm not saying it's against Luka. Luka was phenomenal. He had a triple double. But to take that, if the Kings had lost last night with a Clippers win, Kings would have been out.
Yeah.
So
it just shows you how much.
Saying there's a chance.
Right. Saying one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
So as we do look ahead to the future, you know, it's kind of a hypothetical situation, but, you know, what can the Kings do to ensure a playoff spot next year and years and beyond? I know we talked about De'Aaron and his development and other guys around him, but, you know, we've been singing this sad song the last 12 years. And while there was some optimism this year with some of these with the youth movement, and like we both said, they exceeded our expectations, what can be done next year so we're not a year from now singing the same song? Well, you know, they were good. What can we do to guarantee that they can get in there?
Well, I think I asked that question before this season started to a lot of the Kings brass. I said, what has to happen this year so that by September, when we sit down and we have a preseason meeting and we're talking about all this again and kind of, you know, shooting on dartboards to see what sticks, what has to happen to show that this past year was a success? And they said that they needed to see guys like De'Aaron, Marvin Bagley, Harry Giles take that next step to stardom.
Yeah.
Thinking that they would have an all-star by that point. At least have somebody who's showing the ability to be in the conversation of an all-star. That shocked me. I was like, are you kidding me? There's no chance that happens in 1 year.
And look what happened.
I might have been wrong.
Right.
I mean, those guys have both taken that next step, and it seems like they've skipped like a whole season and a half. So when you add a off-season to that, where guys work on their games, guys do different things, address areas of improvement, and try to get better, add muscle to their body, change their dynamic.
I'm still trying to add muscle to my body.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Well, carbs.
It's gonna be a long time coming, but yeah.
we could trade diets. But there you go. Like, but inevitably, no, one of those guys have to become stars, and I think you see them on the precipice of that. You see De'Aaron Fox being a part of that. There's a really great article that ESPN's Zach Lowe wrote just yesterday.
I saw that, yeah.
Fantastic in terms of what De'Aaron Fox not only means to the Kings, but the progression and everything that he's made since coming to Sacramento, and his importance and how they're building around him, and how Bagley, Giles, Buddy Hield all fits into that. Then, of course, you've got the offseason. Does Harrison Barnes opt in for his $25 million this season, or does he opt out of that contract and get a more lucrative deal, hopefully wanting to stay in Sacramento? Kings have a decision to make with Willie Cauley-Stein. So I don't know what that looks like, but I think just because of the development they've had this year and the playoff race that they were involved this year. And in what I would think, hoping that they keep Dave Joerger around, I would think that will set themselves up nicely for the playoffs. I think that whatever we don't know what the offseason holds. You can't predict injuries, but that would be the expectation.
Well, one thing that you said is interesting is one of them becoming a superstar and blossoming into an all-star. And the one thing, if you look at all the teams pretty much on both sides, but Western Conference teams that are playoff, Warriors, Trailblazers, Rockets, they all have a superstar. Now, granted, you have certain teams like...
And to that point, but they're also done through the draft. And that's what the Kings did. They're following the model set by the Thunder and Denver and more importantly, the Warriors. I mean, they Steph, Clay, Draymond, those are all homegrown talent.
With the exception of Kevin Durant.
But that's all homegrown talent. And to your point with Kevin Durant, look at Oklahoma City. At one point, they had Harden, 3 of the top 10 players in the league right now.
Boom.
Harden, Westbrook, and Durant.
Yep.
So that's all done through the draft. They didn't trade for any of those guys. They didn't sign any of those guys from free agency. The guy that they traded for was Paul George, and they were able to keep Paul George, which most people thought wasn't going to happen. And it was eerily similar to the Kings and Chris Webber. When they got Chris Webber, you traded for Chris Webber with Mitch Richmond, and then you were able to sign him, guy who came to Sacramento, didn't want to be here, and they signed long-term. So very familiar situation to that, and they also had to pay him. And luckily for Sacramento, they have a ton of room this offseason, upwards of $20 million to go out and sign somebody. And then if Harrison Barnes opts out, that's $25 million more.
That they can do and get some. Yeah. So I just want to make sure going forward you are confident with Coach Joerger. You believe he is the man to lead this youth movement and this team.
Yeah, I still think, I don't know about you. I still think they're lucky to have him. I think one of the knocks that I would say is he might not be the most nice guy around. He might not. He sometimes has a prickly side to him.
Hey,
but
Bill Belichick is prickly, and look at him.
And that's fine.
But NFL,
most of the players, I think, recognize, whether they like him or not, recognize that they're all having pretty much the best years of their career under him, and that's primarily because they're all young. Look at a guy like Buddy Hield. I mean, I think that's a perfect guy to look at because in that Warrior game in Oakland where the two of them sniping on the court and the cameras saw that, and that was unfortunate. And I think Dave tends to coach with his emotions a little bit. However, I think he's a brilliant coach. I think he's a brilliant in-game manager. Certainly there's games where, just like a player, you can fault him for losses. But I think that what Dave Joerger has done and his staff, let's not forget, is part of this development with these players. I think they should be highly commended. The team picked up their option for next year. I think you play it out. Their contract now coincides with the length of the tenure of Vlade Divac, so they will all expire at the same time. We'll see what this offseason happens. Maybe Vlade gets an extension. Maybe Joerger gets an extension. But they all sit down, they figure that out, and they'll do so at the end of the year. And I think Dave will be here, and I think they'll be lucky to have him.
Definitely. If you have a coach that's also a goat herder as well, I mean, he's multi-talented. Do like Andy
Well,
pours
you got to
beer.
explain that now.
I know, right? No.
Someone's like, what?
Just go to abc10.com and see the package out there. But yeah, he was herding goats. That was his past weekend, right?
Agriculture is such a big part of his life, and it's fun to see. It's fun to see him in a different realm outside of the basketball court. And outside the basketball court, he loves being around animals, horses, cows. On the farm is where he just loves to be. And so what he did is he partnered with Rayleigh's and some other organizations, and they went out during Ag Day, and they brought like 17 schools and over 1,000 kids to the Bureau of Agriculture over by Garden Highway, and they put the city kids and they brought the farm to the city kids. And it was kind of culture shock for a lot of them to see a goat. And yeah, 2 years ago, Dave Joerger herding goats, showing how to herd goats with sheepdogs, and it was culture shock to me. That's not something I'm used to.
I was about to say, I don't think he did that in Memphis a lot when he was out there. So
if I have to get mud on my Nikes, it's game over. I'm not doing it.
So mud on his Nikes, you definitely don't step on his Air Force Ones if he has those as well. Those are fighting words in certain places. So cool. Well, with that being said, obviously only 8 games left in the season. Kings, for the most part, have exceeded all expectations. They do have a tough stretch their last 8 games. They do see Houston twice. They have San Antonio and some other squads.
Yeah, they got and to your point, they have Pelicans tomorrow.
And the Pelicans tomorrow.
And Anthony Davis is going to play in that game. What I'm hearing. I mean, the guy's probable. Drew Holiday's out, and for Kings fans wanting to see Harry Giles still battling that knee contusion, or that thigh contusion, I should say. He hasn't played in the last 3 games. They're saying they haven't submitted their injury report for that game yet, but he hasn't played in the last 3 games. Hopefully, this is an opportunity for him to play because they have a back-to-back coming up. So I would imagine they practice today. It's a very short flight from Dallas to New Orleans, so we'll see how that goes. And Yeah, I think they can close it out pretty good.
Yeah, I definitely hope so too. Now, Sean, you told me before, a few of the games that I went to this season, they lost, especially the dramatic loss last Tuesday against the Nets. Am I allowed to go to any of the remaining home games here, Sean?
Well, you have to ask Kings fans. This guy ended up on the Jumbotron dancing, and that was a bad look. You see what I'm talking about?
Hold up a second, though. But, Sean, we both know that they have something called the Liddy Committee, all right?
Right, which you're not a part of. So,
can I be an honorary member of the Liddy Committee?
If you get on that bench, then you can do whatever the hell you want. Until then, sit in your seat.
Well, Kings, if you're looking for a free agent, a 36-year-old swingman that can play great defense, can shoot maybe 10% from three-point line.
10%.
Yeah, hey, that's 1 out of 10. Not bad.
That's on fire.
Yeah, there you go. Well, anyways, we thank you guys for being on fire with us. Obviously, if you have any other questions or ideas, feel free to send them in. He's on Twitter at Sean Cunningham. I'm on Twitter at Hey Kevin John.
Hey Kevin John.
There you go. Yeah, make sure you say hey Kevin John.
There's a dog in the newsroom.
And last thing, because today, just the last thing before we get out of here, because today is World Theater Day, prior to this, me and Sean were talking about our favorite athletes who are also actors as well. And I'm going to ask Sean again who his favorite athlete, who an actor is, because it was a really good
I was put on the spot, and so I wanted to go with some. You know what? I'll even change it up. I'll go Jim Brown. Jim Brown is my favorite athlete actor. I said Carl Weathers and Fred the Hammer Williamson. Those are two former Raiders. But no, I'll go Jim Brown. Jim Brown has at least been in quality pictures.
I'm going to go with Chris Webber and Like Mike.
That's my guy.
And Like Mike. Was that one of the greatest?
And Uncle Drew. He steals the scene. He steals the show on Uncle Drew.
That is right.
So, yeah,
he played the old guy, the pastor.
Yeah, I had to tell Webb earlier this year that I hadn't seen it.
Well, definitely go out and see it if you can.
I saw it now, yeah.
But Chris Webber does a phenomenal job.
He's great, yeah.
Shout out to C. Webb. I can't do an old person accent. But that's pretty much the time that we got here. Thank you so much for tuning in, joining in. Obviously, Kings hoping to end above 500. Any last words, Sean, before we get out of here?
Beware of Shaq's backside in Uncle Drew.
On that note, goodbye.